our special guest today, Dr. Jo Ann Freiberg, who most of you know, she worked at the State Department for 14 years, and we had the opportunity to have her around the state helping us not only with bullying, but also, and changing that to mean behaviors, but also helping us with building a better climate, restorative practices. And I've known Jo Ann, we were talking just a little bit before we started getting more people on, but I've known her probably for close to 20 years when she started way back when with the Don't Laugh at Me program. Some of you may remember Don't Laugh at Me. And I have grown to love Jo Ann Freiberg. She is probably one of my favorite people, and probably I always say this when I introduce her. I can't think of a time that after listening to her talk, I didn't learn something new or I didn't think about things differently than I have before. So I know that you all are going to gain a lot by listening to her as well today. Jo Ann's been doing something interesting, just like all of us. She's been doing a lot virtually and teaching not only climate and culture, but restorative practices and working with school districts from a distance. And so she, probably more than anybody else, understands how difficult it is to get out there and build relationships, build a culture, keep everything, the school spirit, everything else going while you're working at a distance. So it'll be interesting to hear what she's gleaned from teaching classes online at a distance, and maybe some strategies that all of us can use when we're trying to build those relationships and maintain the culture climate that we've established. She also knows, as we all do, that now that we're facing the fact that we're not going to go back to school this year, but next year when we do go back, that we're going to need social emotional learning more than we ever have in the past, that no matter who our students are or even our teachers, and the people that we work with, faculty, staff members, that even if they haven't been through major trauma, we've all been through trauma, even if it's just as simple as not being able to work with your colleagues, not being able to see your classmates, not being able to see your extended family. We were talking a little bit earlier about not being able to give hugs to people, to do virtual hugs and virtual waves and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to hear from Jo Ann's perspective what kinds of things we as principals and school leaders need to be thinking about as we move back into our brick and mortar schools, and what kinds of things that we can do in order to help everyone through the challenges and the changes that we're all going to be facing in the next 6 months, if not a whole year. So I've done enough talking right now. I'm going to turn this over to Jo Ann and let her tell you what she's been doing virtually, what she's been learning, what the impact is having, and where she sees we need to go in the future. So Jo Ann, welcome and take it away.
Thank you, Rosie, and thank you all for being here today. I'm really thrilled to see so many faces I haven't seen in weeks and months, and be able to talk with you. Now, as those of you who know me know, I can talk forever, and that's not my goal today. I really do want to answer questions and speak to things that are of interest to you. But let me just give you a little background. For those of you who don't know, I did retire on August 1st, but I basically retired so I could keep working, because I was sort of told, cancel everything, you're going to be in the office. Little did I know, I am in an office, and but the point is, I think my best work is done in schools with educators and so on. And all of you who work with young people, no matter what age, I work hard, but you do the hard work. So having said that, people have been asking me for years and years if I would create online, I don't know, I'm calling them modules or trainings so that it would be easier to access. And for years and years, I have said no, because I never thought could build relationships virtually or online or in canned kind of things. Well, that turned upside down very quickly. And I was in negotiation, or I should say conversation, with a nonprofit organization in Greenwich. We were trying to figure out how 4 schools worth of early childhood, Head Start and so on, as well as they run some after school programs in the area, could get people trained in climate and restorative. And we just couldn't figure it out. Could we do it Saturday? Could we do it whatever, so that more people could be there? And then this happened. And I said, I think I can do this virtually. So within a week, I translated both the 2-day school climate training and the 2-day restorative training, each into 5 2-hour modules. And I have gone through those 2 training sessions twice now. At the end of next week, it will be 3 times. I've also translated some of the advanced training virtually, translated trauma training, translated cultural competence training. And I have been absolutely shocked and astounded by how well it translates. Now, I think years ago, the interactivity wasn't as great. It was sort of one-sided, but now it is incredibly interactive. And I will tell you what I call is one of the silver linings of being able to do this is, well, a couple silver linings. One is I can have up to 100 people at once, or face-to-face was about half that. The second thing is that I purposely log on early and I stay late because people desperately need to connect. And I think it's somewhat unfortunate when we first realized we had to stay home and stay away from others that we called this social distancing, because I really think it's physical distancing and we desperately need the social relationships. So that has been amazing. Even when I've brought people from different districts together, as they get to know one another by turning on their mics, by chatting, by my answering questions, by their interacting with one another. I put up polls. I was telling people I have a little document camera. So the old Elmo thing that weighed 300 pounds now weighs about, I don't know, 1.5 pounds. And so I have really created interactive virtual training sessions. And I look forward to it because I get to connect. So I've been really looking forward to this opportunity to do that. And if anybody's interested, at the end of this, I think Rosie put up my website, but also please email me or, call me or something, because I want to be busy and this is hard. So it's hard for everybody, but this provides a way that we don't have to lose momentum in schools and districts where they have begun the restorative, journey. So let me just say another thing that I think has been critically important right now. We all know about children with trauma, and at whatever level we know that kids are suffered before this, and now we know that they're home very often in unsafe environments, and whether they're in caring environments and they're looking back to coming to school where everybody's been saying you can't get near anybody or whatever. I think every single person, adult and child alike, are dealing with some level of trauma. I know we're all afraid to go out to a restaurant. I think I haven't been to a grocery store in 2 weeks. I plan to do that this afternoon. It's a little scary. You just don't know what's out there. And I think that when we talk about children needing social and emotional support, I see social and emotional intelligence as an outcome. I don't really see it as a thing. And I see working restoratively, which for those of you who don't know too much about the real deal around restorative, it's about setting high expectations, but providing the necessary support to meet those expectations. Classrooms that are restorative, schools that are restorative are calm, they're peaceful, they hold everybody accountable, they create phenomenal community and build high quality relationships, peers to peers, but very importantly, adults to children. I think creating a positive climate, I always say it's 80% of working restoratively, and that's unfortunate in the language of restorative practices because restorative means restore. Only if you don't build something first, you have nothing to restore. And so it is so very, very important when we, and this is, I interrupt myself here, but this has been something that all of the groups that I have been doing virtual training about have been talking about throughout the training, is what does it look like when we come back to school? And I think that, you know me, I'm blunt and direct, and I say what I think, and you can take or leave it. But I think that the most important thing that we can do for our children is to put academics in the background. Not that it isn't important, but I think we really have to build community in what will be some kind of new normal, whether it's half the kids coming in the morning, half the kids in the afternoon, sitting farther apart. I still think we need to be meeting as a community and talking about these issues, and not just for a day or two, but ongoing, and creating routines and rituals. And when I say rituals, please take that in the most positive light. Those of you who have been trained restoratively know what I'm talking about. But kids need predictability. They need the kindness, safety, support of Fred Rogers, and at the same time, they need really clear expectations of General Patton. But they desperately need to know that they're safe. And that is something that has to be said over and over again. I know my wonderful folks in Greenwich, who've now been through 30 hours worth of training with me since March, are trying to create a mantra, kind of like what we heard in The Help. For those of you who've seen The Help, where they say you are kind, you are nice, you are kind, you are important, that kind of thing. And they're trying to figure out something that they can say throughout the buildings so that there's consistency. And in the same way that Fred Rogers always took off his sweater, changed his shoes every single day. And working restoratively is about setting up those kinds of things, but making sure that we are not contributing to their chaos and fear, but we are sharing our calm, as well as being the adults we are, knowing that we need support as well. So I think that this is more important now than ever, but in a way that goes beyond, well, we're still focusing on instruction and instructional time and so on. And I believe to my core that unless we prioritize relationship and community building and working in a way where children can calm down and share their true emotions and be willing to connect with one another, we won't be able to get to the academics. And if we prioritize, and I'll just say working restoratively, because I think in my professional career, and I'm pretty old now, I've never seen a bigger frame, a bigger lens, and those kinds of things. So I think it's really important that we move in that direction. And you know, anything that I can do to help folks get there is really important. I will say, for those of you who haven't had training with me or whatever, that there's an awful lot of people putting out their shingles around working restoratively. And when you focus just on the restoration and the skills around how you process misbehavior differently, you won't be successful. I mean, maybe a little bit, but this is about leaving the island of punishment for the world of restorative, because the line is not from, if you're not punishing, then you're being permissive. When you're working restoratively, always, 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 children, adults, whomever are held accountable. There are always consequences. They're just restorative consequences. They're not punitive consequences. And being restorative is infinitely harder, but there's actually learning, and the chance that it surfaces again is far less likely. I'll just throw out one other analogy, and that is that when we have a child who developmentally or with challenges cannot grasp academic skills, we never, ever, ever give up. We just figure out different kinds of support, more support, whether they go into special education or not. We absolutely provide support. Somehow with behavior, we see it as a different entity, and it's not. I like to say children need chill time, but they don't need to do time. And doing time changes nothing. and usually makes things worse. If I haven't shared the one analogy around working restoratively that I think sort of says it all, and as I was watching my wonderful colleague and friend, Amy Moore, out there sit with her, one of her little guys, when we have misbehavior in our homes, whether we do it well or we do it poorly, we always bring siblings back together. I think they're best described as frenemies. And we never suspend out of the family and say, you're out of here for 2 weeks because you hit him. We don't do that. Somehow we help them make it back up so they can emphasize the friendship part of the frenemy part. But in schools, and for those of you who don't know, for 14 years, I was a lucky person who answered the bullying complaints. So probably I know all too well angry parents and guardians who, wanted a 6-year-old drawn and quartered and jailed for the offense of spitting on their child or whatever. So we would separate, change classes, change bus routes, change lunch waves, change locker proximity. We would, change teams. We would do everything we can so children never had to get back together, which is crazy. That is not the way the world works. We have to learn to get along. We have to understand that conflict and disagreement and harm is inevitable, but it is also repairable. And we can fix it if we have the right skills and strategies. So working restoratively in schools is embracing that family model that, yeah, we're going to have problems, but we're going to fix it. And the time it takes to fix it may be upfront a little bit more time, but in the long run, it saves time and you can actually get to the things you want to do. So I don't know, Bill, are there any questions out there at this point? I can keep talking, but I'd love to answer questions. Or does anybody have any that you want to chat out? I'm very used to this now. So,
Joanne, there is one that I saw that
Yes.
has to do with what are some strategies that teachers can use to deal with all of the different emotions that families will exhibit when they return?
Well, I think you provide an environment where they can share those. And for me, whether, and we were talking about this just recently with the folks who were training last week, whether it's some kind of, I don't want to say celebration for the opening of school, it's going to look very different, but a way in which parents and guardians can gather together to meet, to whether it's a huge big circle that has 6 feet apart from everybody, or even mask decorating or something. But I do think it's critically important that we honor families and parents and guardians' emotions as much as children. And there can be virtual kinds of gatherings if you want to set up, just like you have. This is now for you, and it's exactly what I'm talking about, a routine, a ritual that you're doing so that you have an opportunity for people to meet. And I think that the value of coming together is to be able to see one another. I'm staring at Christine and Cheryl, who, are typically in the same school together, and see one another, countless times during the day, and probably haven't seen one another in weeks. So this is an opportunity to do exactly that. And there's nothing wrong with setting those kinds of things up now in preparation and letting, people come together informally, but let them know what school's going to be like. I think the unpredictability of this pandemic is very upsetting and traumatizing. And I think the more predictability that we can create, whether it's virtually or whether it's online, and having some forum for people to be able to share what their concerns are, surveys that you could send out to say, what are the hardest things? What did your child struggle with? What did you struggle with? What are you thinking about now? I mean, there's no magic to this, but I think that it is really important to think about how we as educators can provide limited predictability and safety in a world that right now is not safe, not predictable, and things are changing daily. So all of those kinds of things. I don't know if that was a great answer, but if somebody else wants to, ask further, I'm happy to speak to that.
So Joanne, a couple of questions about, and obviously it is unpredictable. We don't know exactly what teachers will be going back to, but questions about teachers who, ended the school year and have been working virtually now with students. And then what happens in the fall? We may begin again virtually with a brand new group of students. Or if students come back, in person, who are now not familiar with being in school. I'm talking about younger students in particular, and have been home for a lot longer time, that separation anxiety about, re-entering the school day. So several questions around those set of issues.
Well, there are definitely issues that we need to be thinking about now. And I think over the summer, in fact, I will share with you something I said that was also recorded. I think you can find it on CTN, because I sit on the SEL Collaborative Task Force. And that's one of the nice things about not being at the state anymore, as I got invited to be on that task force. And when you listen to educational leaders at the state, I'm mindful of what you asked, Bill, but let me just kind of back it up. I think what we're hearing, and I'm talking about superintendents and our state department, our leadership groups, and so on. We're talking about, have we satisfied the number of days to make it a year? What's going to happen with graduation? Well, these children are going to fall so far behind. Can we beef up summer camps? No longer going to be summer camp. It's going to be, instructional time. And I want to say time out. I really believe we will harm our children, our colleagues, those we work with, if we don't say, wait a minute. We have to reprioritize what is important. I think that so often children's emotional needs are not being met. And now they have been home, sometimes alone, sometimes in environments where they were harmed before, and now it's just intensified because of, parents worried about income and taking it out on each other as well as on children and so on. And we have a completely, not completely different, but I think a grossly enhanced, desperate need for paying attention to people, to children, to one another. And if we don't do that, so I do think that no matter what it looks like, we are very open with one another. We say, we don't know the answer to that question, or let's find out, but we are going to be a family. I don't know how many of you know the Enlightenment novella by Voltaire called Candide, but any of you who know anything about that little story, they go through literally hell over years and years and years. And at the very, very end, these people who were so beautiful and so wealthy and so well taught, all they could say is, we need to tend our garden. We have to tend our garden. And I think that that's just as true or more true right now, given what's going on. So I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach, but I do think, and this came up with the, I think it was the early childhood folks, the leadership has been meeting about what it's going to look like. And we started talking about it, and they online were reassuring the other 70 folks that, yep, we're talking about it. And it just dawned on everybody at once, wait a minute, we need to include you. So I think it's not about administrators and central office and administrative council just talking and all of a sudden doing something to faculty who, again, then their moods take it out on kids. I think now we should be supporting one another and sharing as much as we can possibly share and inviting input and questions and so on, so that we're building community now. And the only thing that we are really missing is that physical proximity. Bill, you may want to ask the question again, because I'm not sure I answered it, and I went off on a tangent. So
no, you hit a lot, because I think kind of the message there is there is not going to be one single approach. There's going to be lots of different approaches, and to really engage with parents, with kids, with teachers, with all the stakeholders to make those decisions that are going to be in the best interest of kids. There is one discussion, I guess, that's going on about a specific start to the year where students begin the new school year with their former teacher and classmates, and then kind of over the first few days or maybe even a week kind of transition from that experience to the new year experience. Do you have any thoughts about that in particular, Joanne?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that there's not one cookie cutter. I think the best expertise is within each and every faculty and figuring out your context. I'm reminded, I think transitions are hard for everybody. As I watch people come on to this or come off, some people like me are neurotic about making sure you're early. Other folks, right at 11:30 come on. And we are all different. We have difficulties with transitions. Those who are experiencing trauma, transitions, I want to say, make or break them. I'm reminded of how schools in Connecticut managed, and I would say districts, not just schools, but districts in Connecticut managed 9/11. Some districts, and this had nothing to do with age. So we're not talking about, early childhood, pre-K versus high school. But in some districts, word came out from central office, we will not talk about this at all. Business as usual, we will not talk about it. We're not doing that. Then on the other extreme, there was no instruction for a full week. I mean, it was just all about counseling and meeting and sharing. And I don't know what the right answer is, but the wrong answer is saying we won't talk about it. So I say that in the context of, I think in some places we've been having parades of cars that are, honoring all kinds of physical distancing, but parades of cars that have gone around neighborhoods. In other schools, they've been dealing with that transition virtually, and teachers have been creating videos and talking and actually using restorative strategies to in their conversations. But I think that it does make some sense, especially if we didn't ever have closure. I mean, I have a picture I took of one of my adverse childhood experiences number lines in Old Saybrook, and I was supposed to be there a full day, and I was told at lunchtime, that's it, we've got to get up to speed with distance learning, and schools closed the next day. So I think that there wasn't a transition into this, and that was tough. And I think there has to be some kind of transition out of it, but I don't think it's a cookie cutter, but I do think that suggestion will probably make an awful lot of sense in many, many schools.
So Joanne, as you're talking about transitions, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about if you have students with anxiety? And it could be the little people, and they're, that they're clinging to their parents or whatever, and now they've been with their parents longer, or it could even be high school, middle school kids who have that same kind of anxiety? What kinds of things can teachers be doing to prepare their students now, and what things should we maybe be looking for when we get back to school?
Well, certainly having what I will call virtual circles, where we just say, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? How can we keep safe? What's going to help you? So asking directly. And I think that providing an awful lot of patience and calmness in schools that really do embrace this work. Nobody yells. People are calm and patient and are all about teaching all kinds of skills, whether those are academic or social, and really listening to one another, and taking the lead. If there seems to be, when I say taking the lead, being sensitive to when we can say, okay, time out, everybody circle up, let's talk about this. I think that probably the hardest thing will be if educators go back with that notion that I have to be on this particular page of the curriculum at this particular time, and that's it. And somebody's looking over my shoulder, and if I don't achieve that goal, I'll get fired. Well, guess what? That anxiety translates to kids. So, and to families. I've been clipping interesting articles. Many families, it wasn't about Connecticut, but many families have just stopped doing distance learning. You know, whether they had a computer or Wi-Fi to begin with, they've got 3 children who all have unbelievably rigorous kinds of assignments to get done. Parents are still working. They're trying to cram it into a weekend, and they've said enough. This is creating so much anxiety at home. And then you have another smaller but very important group of students who are relishing the fact that they don't have to go to school and deal with being teased, being excluded. And so they're just happy to be there. Now that's a different kind of anxiety that's going to come back. But I think that we better be, and I don't say that in a threatening way, but I think it's so incumbent upon us to say what's really important for our children, for us, for the parents and guardians. I mean, at any point, I don't know, I feel it, you step out the door and you don't know if somebody with coronavirus is, lurking in the background. So we're seeing children die. We're seeing children who may not get very sick, but bringing it home to people who might. I mean, there's so many layers of this that I think, and we all know this, that if children, adults aren't safe, nothing goes forward. Nothing. And so maintaining physical safety to the best of our abilities, but critically important is emotional safety. That's what children care about.
Jo Ann, there are a lot of comments in the chat about parents, and you kind of alluded to it. There's, certainly a group of parents who the whole distance learning has been, too much. They're overwhelmed. There's another group of parents who are saying, we want more, where's the instruction? There's probably some parents, maybe the larger group in the middle who don't know what's going on or don't feel competent to be their children's teachers. So teachers and administrators and districts are going to have to deal with parents coming from a lot of different places. Has this been a positive experience, a negative experience? Just the questions that they have, now relinquishing their children back into the schools and the school districts. So any thoughts about how districts and teachers can begin to navigate those different sets of parents' emotions as we transition back?
Yeah, I think that it would be very important and very useful to ask them. And whether you ask them on some kind of generic, don't want to say blog or survey or something, but whether it is a virtual survey like Google or, you know, something like that, or if it's a physical piece of paper. And I always, whatever questions, and you're mentioning some of them, Bill, but there's probably a lot more. And again, each one of our schools is dealing with different kinds of things. I know I have colleagues from Bridgeport on today, and questions from Bridgeport may be somewhat different, I don't know that, than questions from, you know, Cheshire or from Fairfield. Or, so I think creating our own and asking our educators, paras, special educators, speech pathologists, counselors to weigh in on what kinds of things people have been talking about, and creating a survey so that you can get that information over the summer. And whenever I do, say, a work environment survey with a faculty or staff, you know, right now the good stuff I'm talking about, I like to talk about silver lining. You know, what are some of the silver linings in all of this? But what are the things that have been the biggest challenges? What are the things that you're worried about in coming back? And I really think having that information over the summer so that you can plan for it, and you're not just, we may think one thing, the guardians may tell us something else. You know, you may want to ask, has anybody in your family or neighborhood contracted the virus? Has anybody, you know, been in the ICU or on a ventilator? Has anybody died? Because I do think we need that information, because it's going to impact our classrooms. Some of this we may know already, but, you know, everybody's going to have somebody who's impacted in one way or another. And what's your hopes or dreams? What's something you want me to, what's something you want me to know about your child, your circumstances, your concerns? But if you don't ask, you'll never find out. So,
Joanne, I'm kind of curious, from the work that you've been doing virtually, and what kinds of things have you noticed really work well? And this can be with adults, especially because a lot of the administrators that are on with us today are doing faculty meetings, or doing PTO, PTA meetings, any number of different groups of dealing with different groups of people. What are strategies that you use that may definitely work with the adults that you're working with, but also with the children, to build those relationships and keep, you know, build that climate and stuff? What suggestions do you have when you're working with people?
Well, I think that the top suggestion is that building relationships is the most important thing. The content is sort of secondary. And any of you who've taken any of my training sessions, you know there's a heck of a lot of content. I'm not saying you need to sacrifice that, but in the translation of the face-to-face trainings to the virtual modules, at every step I say, how can I make this interactive? How can I make this so that I get to know the people in the room? You know, what can I do for my kinesthetic adult learners? Although I'm doing something on Friday with high school students. I'm doing some trauma presentation for high school students in Bridgeport next Friday morning. So it's not exclusively adults, but I really think that, you know, for kinesthetic learners, I've created polls, and you know, we could talk about the information, we can get the same thing across, but the kinesthetic learners like to punch something. So, you know, and I'm encouraging people to unmute themselves in the middle of a sentence. And as soon as they feel comfortable and believe that I mean it, they do. And the chat is like unbelievable. And I've been capturing the chat and saving that, because so much good brainstorming. And then now that I have this little document camera, we can create a social contract. And at the beginning of each module, I flash that in front of everybody, you know, reminding people that everybody should have that. So I am trying to do everything I can possibly do other than touch people, because I think that that's what people need. So, but uppermost in my mind is building a virtual community and giving people an opportunity. That's why I log on and I say I'll stay after if folks just want to chat, just to give them the opportunity to do that. So I think that and I think it's going to happen for quite some time when we do get back into whatever it looks like down the line, whether it's split, morning and afternoon, whether it's just social distancing and masks and so on. There's going to be a lot of anxiety, and I think we have to take that as the lead as to what we do. I think it's the end. So did that answer? I start to meander around, Rosie. So
yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I'm wondering, just me personally, how do you do circles when you're in a virtual world? Like we've at one point today, we had 100 people online. We've got about 90 something right now. How in a group this size, or would you just not do a group this size? How do you facilitate circles when you're on?
When I'm on virtual, I have my lovely little photograph of a circle, and I always start each session saying, does anybody have any thoughts overnight? And reflections, did you practice this? All of those kinds of things. And in doing that, I mean, sometimes there's very little. One day last week, we had a virtual circle for, I don't know, close to a half hour of a 2-hour session. In other words, I think that we take the lead on what people need, and we started to talk about some of these issues. What does it look like? What we talked about yesterday really makes a difference. So what does this look like when we go back? And then I went back to process and making sure that everybody's included in what this looks like. Because I think that's really the hardest thing when we are all physically apart, is making sure that we have now a virtual way, whether that's in Zoom, WebEx, phone, email, whatever. I just think that that has to be the priority.
I just want to jump in here. There was a question about resources and sharing of resources. And I will say, for folks who don't know, on the CAS website, we do have a clearinghouse of resources related to education in this COVID-19 world. So I would definitely suggest that you look there. We're constantly adding to it as new things come up, and it's organized into different categories for different levels, different types of students, different aspects of instruction and schools in our COVID-19 world and distance learning. So take a look at that. And the State Department of Ed has resources which we link to as well. Someone made a comment about everybody kind of reinventing the wheel, and we're trying to avoid that as much as possible by providing a forum like this for sharing ideas. And as we get specific resources, that's where we would put them on our COVID-19 clearinghouse on the CAS website, which is CAS-CIAC.org. So I would absolutely recommend folks take a look there.
I have on my website, I don't have a COVID-19 thing, but I have a lot of resources around working restoratively and so on, which I think predate having to look at it through the lens of the pandemic. But I have resources there, and if anybody has a particular question about a particular resource, email me. I'll be happy to help.
I just put your info into the chat, Joanne, and at the very end, I'll put up the slide that has the same information. But yeah, definitely email, get in contact with Joanne, because she's great at and really fast at answering. I can remember one time as a principal that I had an issue at my school, and I sent out on a Saturday morning, I sent out an email to her and received an answer probably within an hour or two.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
I remember, I answer a lot. I just try to be on top of it. I try to model what I'm talking about. But
I have a question too, like teachers at a distance, principals at a distance, and you're watching the students. What are some signs for looking at students who might be facing trauma, different issues with trauma? I know that I've heard a lot of principals talking about DCF, and like when we know we've got the kids at school, we can really see that. Are there any signs or things that people should be looking for?
do you want me to take that?
Yes.
Or, okay, yeah. Well, I think that kids who are misbehaving, if they have a lot of trauma in their lives, they walk in the door about 33 times more likely to misbehave. So certainly kids who are misbehaving. But then kids who go almost comatose, they really are quiet, they're trying to disappear. Very often it's very wise, smart kids who just want to get their stuff done. They don't want to risk having anybody call them out. And even call them out that they got the best grade. You know, there are so many people over the years I've met who, you know, got called out for getting the best grade and make sure that on every future test or they missed something on purpose so that that would never happen again. Different kids operate in different ways. Then there are a group of kids, and we start to see these children, especially in upper elementary and secondary school, where they're very good at masking. And these are ones that go out and run for office, are, you know, president of a service learning. They just want people to think that they live a perfect life, and they don't. And what I really say about this, I mean, I've done so much reading around trauma. And by the way, there's an awesome documentary that's just been released as of May 1st on Netflix called Cracked Up, the story of Daryl Hammond's life, he was actually very traumatized. It's well worth seeing. It's about 1 hour and 40 minutes. In any case, I always believe that we do not need to know what any given child's circumstances are to do the right thing for kids. What we do know is very often, and I've watched the numbers grow from 12.8% of students in the 17-18 school year to 14.8, and now we're over 15% of children of special ed children in the state. I mean, our numbers keep growing, keep growing, keep growing. And what I think we desperately need to understand, because we see kids who present as if they have ADHD or ODD, and I'm not a special educator, but those of you who know all the fancy alphabet soup letters, you know that, you know, kids who are not up to snuff for one reason or another, we send them into special ed. And we do that because we know they need help. But unfortunately, and I believe to my core that our numbers of special education students that are legitimately special ed would not change. They'd be fairly constant, and it would be below 10% if we had a trauma bucket, but we don't right now. And so we legitimately see the behavior and we say, wow, let's send them to special ed. But here's the problem, and I said this on the collaborative last week. The interventions that we would legitimately provide for a child with ODD or ADHD or some other legitimate diagnosable challenge are very, very different than the interventions that we need to provide for children with trauma. And since we have no great way of finding out right now what those children are, the two top things that they need, no matter what other kinds of interventions they get, therapy, you know, EDMR, behavior, I mean, no matter what else they get, the two top non-negotiable interventions are they need a safe, physically, emotionally, culturally, intellectually, safe, regulated environment. In other words, predictable. They need that, and they need that with high quality relationships between the children and adults. And those two things cannot be separated, and those need to happen for children with trauma before anything else. Well, guess what? All children thrive. Even children who are living in the most wonderful, caring environments thrive. when they have a safe environment and they have high quality relationships with adults. So we don't need to have any particular identification. Oh, wow, this one's dealing with a lot of trauma. Sometimes we know, but to do the right thing for children, which is why I think right now we have a moral and practical imperative to work restoratively. I don't think we have a choice anymore. I don't see how we can be in environments where you misbehave, you are excluded from peers and other kinds of activities. And we have, what is it doing right now to be excluded from the normal things that we would do? The lunchroom, recess for young children, the gym for older children. I mean, we are traumatizing without even, it's not our fault. But every single child that comes back, whether they live in the most wonderful environment, need to have school. And now we know how important school is. We need to have school be respite, refuge. And I guess I get a little passionate about it. But.
Well, we all need school. That's a definite. I think we're all missing it. I think we're all missing the social activities that go along with school. I'm going to start winding us up just because we've almost been here an hour, but I'd like to hear 3 takeaways, Joanne, 3 things. If you had to prioritize the 3 things that you want the people online right now to remember from our conversation today, what would be the 3 things that you would like to say to us?
Well, I think that the number one thing, well, there's so many, but I think the main reason why educators and classrooms and schools don't work restoratively is they don't know how. These are different kinds, they're not impossible, they're very simple strategies, but I think it's incumbent upon people, if you don't have those tools in your colleagues' toolboxes, to get those tools. I think that's important. The second thing would be to assume everybody is dealing with some level of trauma, whether this is just episodic because of the pandemic or it's layered on top of what the pre-existing trauma there was. And I think we have to take that into account and create the most calm, safe, predictable, wonderful environments for one another, as well as for our parents and guardians and family members and the children that we work with. I mean, these are all things that fit together. You know, sort of knowledge is power. And if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't have the strategies, I really think it's critically important to get them. And I guess last is I would say, and these are in no particular order, and I could keep going, but we're running out of time, is please prioritize people before content. And I can't stress that enough, because if you don't want to go to school, if you don't want to, if you don't feel safe, nothing else is going to happen. And I have such fabulous data, which if anybody really needs it to convince a superintendent or convince a board of ed or something that this work needs to be done, I'll share it. Just email me. That's very easy to do. And it's profound. You know, dropping chronic absenteeism rates from nearly 30% to under 4%, just by focusing on climate and restorative and upping or diminishing, having just nosedive around suspensions and expulsions. I mean, you need to have them in school. Why do we have to send them out? You know, so I know, Rosie, the time is ending. So
I could listen to you all day, Joanne, and I'm sure the people that are still with us which are most of the people that joined us today, are also, they could sit and listen to you all day. So like I said, I always learn so much from you. I think my 2 takeaways, and you just basically kind of summarize them, but the whole idea of physical distancing, because we all need to be social, and we need to be connecting with each other, however that looks and however we can make it happen in our lives. And the other one is just that whole idea of timeout. I was actually clapping, I think, when you said that, but to make sure that we prioritize the things that are important and really step back and see what's happening. So I want to thank you again, because every time I listen to you, I learn so much, and I'm sure that our viewers are, and I know that there were a lot of people that couldn't be here today that said that they would be happy if we recorded this. So I'm sure when they watch this, they'll be taking away some of your pearls of wisdom as you were speaking to us today. So thank you for joining us and taking time to do that. Again, I have her information on here so that you can go out and see her website and call her or email her, because Joanne does get back to people. And I would just like to say before we sign off that we do our Zoom-in meetings every Tuesday and Thursday from 11:30 to 12:30 every week. And if in fact you have anyone that you would like us to bring in as guests, please email Bill Silva, me, or Karen Pachter, because we are interested in helping you to get the resources that you need from all of our elementary, middle level, high school, and school leader administrators across the state. And with that, Bill, do you have anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, I just want to thank Joanne, of course. As always, a great opportunity to hear from you and to share. And just to encourage everybody to come back for our Zoom-in and be in touch with us. CAS really wants to be an organization that's helpful to you in terms of support and resources and advocacy and communication. So we look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you at our Zoom-in or some other event. So have a great rest of your day, and thanks for being here.